ValveTime.net.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of ValveTime TalkTime. We're back after a short hiatus, as also Valve have been on quite a short hiatus of 2 weeks in Hawaii on their company holiday.
We were also in Hawaii.
We were also there, but we stayed in a much cheaper hotel right near the volcano.
It was awful, that hotel, wasn't it? It was awful.
And we were spying on them with binoculars, trying to see if they were working on Half-Life.
Which is also going to be one of the topics we're talking about today. We've not touched on really Half-Life in the previous TalkTime episodes, but we will in this one. So yeah, firstly, introduce everyone. I'm Glenn, as usual here. Nick, you're here, aren't you?
Yep, I'm here. Hello.
Hey, Nick.
Nice to be back.
John.
Am I here?
You are.
Am I?
I promise you are.
Oh, okay.
And James, you're here as well, aren't you?
Hello.
Hello. Good work with the roundup that came out this weekend.
Thank you.
Nice work with that. Yeah, so this episode we're going to be talking about Half-Life 3 and what Valve have to do to meet expectations. This comes off the back of Bioshock Infinite, which came out fairly recently. It's to much acclaim. It's probably been, well, people already claiming it as Game of the Year, which is perhaps a bit too early to do so in April. But it's been a huge success. The time between Bioshock 1 and Infinite is 6 years, and currently, since Episode 2 and Half-Life 3...
Half-Life 2, Episode 2.
Episode 2, exactly. Is also been 6 years at this point. So there's a similarity between the time and how far irrational games have sort of come from Bioshock 1 to Infinite, and perhaps where Valve need to go to move Half-Life on to Half-Life 3. So what have they got to do to meet those expectations? What would we expect of it? And there's a couple of sides to look at that from. So that's what we're going to do in this episode. So who wants to kick off things? Where should we start with Half-Life 3?
I would say that we're not going to see Half-Life 3 for quite a while still. I really feel that they are working to finish Source 2 before they would put essentially their flagship game onto, you know, if they're working on a project as big as Source 2, I really don't see why they would put Half-Life 3 on anything but that.
Your assumption that Source 2 on that basis is a single large ship product which will be a massive transition over and will exist in one form. Obviously Source is modular, and to some degree there's been 7, 8, 9 different major versions of Source over time.
Yeah, and I feel like we've seen the benefit of that, but we're also beginning to see the detriment of it, because it's you look at a Source game and it's still a Source game, and there's definitely limits to it that are really beginning to show. Whereas other engines are starting to get better about, you know, level size and streaming their content, and, you know, what are essentially artificial limits now are beginning to show. I mean, you can still only have something like, you know, 4,000 entities in a map, which sounds like a lot until you realize just how many entities you really need to have the kind of detail that a good map requires.
And that's also sort of had a problem with the mod community, hasn't it? The sort of it sort of split the mod community into pieces, really, because of the fact that you've got all these different versions of Source, and certain things don't work on some version than the other. So it's really fragmented it, which has been a huge problem with the innovative side.
Yeah, it's totally fractured. I mean, I don't think it's all that big a stretch to say that the mod scene is essentially dead these days. A lot of the mod makers that, you know, I've had contact with over the years, they've decided that it's better to just switch engines. Like there's one particular team that, you know, made a rather, like, they did the gray mod.
Yeah.
And it's my understanding that they are changing engines to the UDK because it's so much easier.
As many teams have,
like, yeah, it's just the Source engine is just so completely and utterly packed with these strange little quirks that no one really knows how they work or what they do, that it's better to just shift engines. I mean, it used to be that, you know, creating a mod for Half-Life would be a really great boon because there was a giant community already there. You could guarantee to get like a lot of eyes on your product, but it's really just no longer worth the effort involved to get the Source engine to do what it is you want it to do.
Absolutely. That's completely true.
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree. I think an updated engine, sort of a next gen engine as well, is going to be one of the most important things they can actually put into the next Half-Life game. Obviously, Half-Life 3, but it has to be an engine which can compete in the same way that Source did back in sort of 2004 with Half-Life 2. It has to do the same sort of leap, and I'm not actually sure how they can manage that in this sort of day and age. I think it's going to be a big uphill climb.
There's two perspectives to look at that from, though, Nick, isn't there? Because we're talking about from a technical perspective, like James does, what it can support, you know, the textures and all these sort of other things that it can do, you know, for mod support and how good the game is. But also there's the aesthetics of it. Now, Valve have always been quite good in the sense that they never overdevelop their engine. We look at Crytek engines, they put things in which have no improvement to the gameplay experience. There's no point making look something that good if it doesn't help. And Valve have always been good at sort of a modular approach where they only add what they need to add to the engine. So when you talk about it from that perspective, how can they compete? Do you mean, can they make something which is aesthetically beautiful to compete in today's market?
No, I was saying sort of, I think it has to impress in the same sort of scale as the Source engine did, and when it was first released. And my point was that I don't think that's possible. I don't think a leap of that size or of that scale is viable today,
because the competition's so much better.
Yeah. I mean, like engines like the Crytek engine and all the other stuff like that, like Unreal Engine 4. Like I can't honestly see. I'd like to see them do it, but I honestly can't see Valve sort of take that leap and sort of get to the same level as sort of Unreal Engine 4 or any of those other sort of big next gen engines that we're starting to see sort of this year.
That's from a power perspective, isn't it? John, what do you want to add on that? Sorry.
I was going to say, besides the technical aspects, they're also leaning toward, they think of people first before, oh, we want to make the most beautiful game ever. But again, we want to, help our customers out. If they have a low end system, we want them to be able to run it. Besides people that have, the high end systems as well. And not just, the system aspects of things. I think they are waiting to promote a big name title with their Steam box when they release it.
Yeah, that's a possible way they're looking at it. Half-Life 3 might be a title to launch on the Steam box. There's rumours about that.
I think it might launch alongside, but I don't think it would be an exclusive. I think if it was any kind of exclusive that people have kind of been guessing it would be, it's like a shot in the foot. If they try to do that.
Well, I didn't mean like exclusive, but I think when they go to release it, that's when they'll release it, not just for Steam box, but for PC and the others as well.
I'd say possibly. Like, I don't think they're going to delay Half-Life 3 or the Steam box for one another. Like, if it's sort of like the Orange Box sort of scenario where you've got a couple of products kind of colliding for a sort of a release date, then possibly, yeah. I don't see why not. But I honestly think the Steam box will be out long before we see any kind of Half-Life game. As kind of annoying as that is to say, I think it's sort of true, yeah.
Right.
I think you're right. From this perspective, we've looked at it from a sort of an engine perspective, so a technical perspective behind the scenes. But you have to remember the other side of Half-Life is entirely the narrative-driven experience, the story that's kept us hanging, and is a lot of the reason why we're so desperate to see a sequel since Episode 2. And Valve does that amazingly well, and now other studios like Irrational also being able to produce similar narrative experiences, which if you can go anywhere, the discussions about Infinite are just hugely in depth. They really blew people away, and they need to retain that narrative driven experience into Half-Life 3 as well. Now that Mike Laidlaw, the writer's still with Valve, obviously the company's changed a lot since then actually as well. A lot more focus into things like Dota 2 and multiplayer experiences. So I'm pretty sure they can still deliver that experience. But they need to compete at the same level from that side as well. Which is difficult.
I was going to say something that me and you mentioned the other day, Glenn, when we were chatting. Like you mentioned how you don't like a lot of the sort of comedy tones of sort of TF2 and Portal kind of seeping into stuff like Half-Life. Like, do you think that they could actually manage to kind of keep the very dark and serious narrative tone of Half-Life 2 and Half-Life 1 to a degree, without kind of the comedy elements from like the likes of Chet Falazak or Eric Wolpert? Do you think they actually managed to stop it?
I think it's possible.
I hope so. I think they have to, otherwise it's going to kind of come off as very sort of from game to game, like sort of going from episode 2 and the extremely serious and very emotional ending to this very it might be kind of a lot more lighthearted, and that could come across as extremely sort of warped. if that makes sense.
You're right. I think it did seep into episode 2. I mean, if you remember the AR2, AR3 discussion, we talked about this before, where there was a bit of a joke where he said, I'm very good with AR3, and he's like, there's no such thing.
Like, I don't have a problem with that particular part, because that is just a bit of light relief within a sort of darker storyline. But I think what I was kind of getting at was obviously your concern with sort of the overall storyline kind of becoming sort of more lighthearted and sort of diluted, if that makes sense.
That would be tragic.
Yeah, well, yeah, it would be. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, they have to keep this dark narrative tone, otherwise the game's lost.
But besides, the tone of the storyline, being dark and and not comical, but what kind of game mechanics would you want to see in the next Half-Life?
That's a good question, because like if we're going back to this whole BioShock comparison, if you look at the gameplay from Infinite to BioShock 1, which was the 2 BioShocks that Irrational actually did work on, there's a lot of similarities, which is what Valve should kind of stick to, like keep it sort of the same core mechanics, but there has to be some kind of growth. Like with Infinite, it was sort of like the sky rails and sort of like the shift into more open environments. I mean, Valve did try that with episode 2, with sort of like the bigger sort of environments and the more sort of open-ended scenarios you can actually fight within. But I'm not actually sure how, with the same sort of weapons and characters and themes, that you could actually sort of develop in the same sort of way that Infinite did, because obviously Infinite's an entirely original side to the universe, if that makes sense. So it's entirely separate, because so you can have this excuse to have these different mechanics and these different themes at play without, because obviously you couldn't have Gordon Freeman suddenly jump on a sky rail, could you? Within the established narrative, do you get what I mean? Yeah, that's one of my personal sort of issues. Like, how?
I mean, look. I mean, what we know, kind of the backstory about what we think is going to happen. We know that they're going to travel to possibly Antarctica. It's going to be cold. There could possibly be maybe a portal gun there. We don't know that for a fact.
I hope not. I
highly doubt that.
Like, I honestly don't think that.
I mean, we don't know that, but I'm just saying there's all these possibilities of what could possibly happen. But the also thing is, do you think Half-Life 3 could, like Skyrim could it be an open world game?
What you mean? Are you referring to those rumors from last year, where people are going, it's going to be open world?
Not even.
But I mean, do you think it could work though? Like maybe, you have to go here.
Honestly, no. I mean, there's another question which could be raised from that. I mean, could it work within the Half-Life universe? Possibly, like as an MMO, but within the actual Half-Life series as the core series, no. There's just no way, in my opinion, anyway.
Well, I mean, I don't want to interrupt James or Glenn, so if you guys want to go ahead.
No, go on.
What I was just going to say was, I don't think with the Adventures of Gordon, I wouldn't say it would work for that. But if you would want to do like a prequel during like the 7-hour war or something, I think that could possibly work for an open world game.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of thing could, if it was entirely separate.
Yeah, I mean, the Half-Life universe has enough in it that if you really look for it, yeah, you could do that. But I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that Valve has already toyed with the idea of having a Half-Life offshoot with episode 4. And for, it's like, I don't know if we ever got like a very specific reason why that project was canceled, but I think that's a pretty good sign that, it's like, if you can't do that, they're not going to do something that's even more ambitious than, a simple romp through Ravenholm done by a different studio.
Yeah.
And I really don't think that Valve would be the studio that would tackle this. They are, when it comes to their Half-Life games, it's all about the narrative.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. They have done things where, it's like, yeah, they try to make things a little bit more open. I don't feel that they've necessarily done that terribly well. But I feel partially that's the problems with the engine.
Yeah.
I would have actually liked to have seen in BioShock Infinite a lot more openness to how the game plays, because the levels are pretty big, they're incredibly detailed, there's a lot going on. I can't imagine even 1/4 of a BioShock Infinite level being recreated in the Source engine. If someone wants to try that, by all means, I would love to be wrong.
I'd like to see that.
But I do not think that is something that the Source engine currently has by any
Too
stretch.
much of BioShock is on rails, isn't it, Nick?
What is that? Is that a pun, or because it sounds like it?
Yeah, that's
all right. I'm going to cut that out, just so you know. That's
you're not
that
cutting
is
it out,
like
James. That was pretty golden, to be honest.
It was not. That was,
Well, I was just gonna say, going back to the mechanics wise, I would like to see not. I would like to see better AI, of course. I want to see a more darker tone, like how we saw in Ravenholm. I'd like to see that throughout the game. And another thing I think would be neat is have it like different pathways. What happens to the storyline if you choose this way, or what happens if you go this way.
I don't want that.
No, John.
You seriously
go
want
play a different series.
John, you want
don't want
branching
that.
narrative.
That's not for me.
But it could work though. I mean,
Not for the main
I don't
Half-Life
think they can stray too far
series.
away from the basic concepts that make Half-Life Half-Life. I think they did it with Portal at one point, and they realised they've started making a different game. If you start putting regenerating health into Half-Life 3, if you...
No. I'm not saying I want regenerating health.
Yeah, but there's never been an alternate
the
story
principle.
route in Half-Life, and if you started to add that now, it just everyone's following the same story. You can't start splitting
Okay,
people
well then
off.
let me rephrase that. Instead of a different consequence, what about in Left 4 Dead 2? Why I'm assuming it's the Parish campaign where there's different pathways to go to get to the ending result.
Yeah.
That would be interesting because then it changes the gameplay though.
You want a different IP like that. Those things just don't fit in the Half-Life universe. Between Half-Life 1, Half-Life 2, Episode 1, Episode 2, they go for a very specific narrative goal, and it's like I find it's a benefit and a negative that the way they're set up is they do railroad the player an awful lot, because it's more like reading a book than it is like running outside playing, make believe with your friends.
Mm-hmm.
But it also gives the point of how much can you endure playing that over and over again until you get bored of it. You know what I mean?
Depends on how good the story is.
Half-Life is not meant to be an entirely replayable experience where you're going over and over and over like the AI director does in Left 4 Dead. It's meant to be a streamlined, really well delivered narrative experience that gives you a really potent punch of the point they're trying to get across the first time you play it. And you can replay it again, but it's not meant to be something you sit there and play 6 times in a row. That's just not what Half-Life is. And I'm happy that it's that way. I am so overjoyed it's that way. That's the way I've enjoyed it all these years. And I want it to stay the same, to be honest.
Well, I think Glenn, you're 100% right. I think focusing on something like replay value over sort of like quality of like a sort of linear experience is another shot in the foot. That would completely ruin the series, and it would completely alienate every single existing fan.
Going back to what you said about Ravenholm as well, I think Gabe once said, like, what do you think you would like to do more in Half-Life, or what you're not doing so well? And he said, we don't scare people as much as we'd like
right,
to.
yeah, I remember that.
That's something he once said. So I think if they did go down that route again, when we talked about dark tones, I think Half-Life would be the ideal IP to follow that through, based on like Portal's so much lighter. They burnt themselves out, didn't they? At the end of Episode 1, Episode 2, they burnt themselves out working on those games. They needed to do something that was a breath of fresh air, and they've got away for it, and it's been 6 years they've been away for it. The people at Valve have changed a lot since then. The people working on that game, from sound, from modelling, texturing, has changed a huge deal. When they had a lot of people they laid off fairly recently, a lot of those people were people that worked on Half-Life doing modelling and texturing on those old games. The newer people that have come in and work on things like the orchestral music for Dota 2, for example. Models and textures for more mythical approaches to things. So maybe some more similar to things that like perhaps Blizzard do to some degree. And that might be a sign of perhaps some more of their focus in the future. You said, James, you don't think you're going to see Half-Life 3 for still a while yet. You could be right, because their personnel certainly doesn't reflect that.
Yeah, I would be not surprised if we got even a new IP before Half-Life 3.
Yeah, I feel the same. I mean, like you said at the start, James, like about Source 2, like Half-Life 3 is the obvious choice to sort of launch Source 2 with, and to kind of show off the prowess of the engine. But at the same time, it doesn't mean they will do that, or that they necessarily should. I think as you said, it is just as likely that they will launch with a new IP, or maybe kind of an existing IP but with a new iteration. Because obviously Gabe did say recently that they'd quite like to go back to some franchises they haven't touched for a while. I mean, I'm not sure how true that is, because you mentioned Ricochet, but but yeah, I mean, like that's a possibility that they could go for. Use something else that people are kind of that's well known and well established, but at the same time introduce this new engine. You know what I mean? It could also work as the same way that Half-Life would if they introduced it with Source 2. Familiarity with something brand new.
There's some of our ideas where we think Half-Life might go, and we'd encourage people to tell us where they think it might go. Generally, our question is, will it meet the expectations that we want it to? And I don't think that's ever possible. The amount of time that's passed and how much interest the game's drummed up over all these years has pretty much placed it as one of the best games of all time. And how do you follow on from that? It's a very, very difficult thing to do, even for a game studio like Valve. So will they ever meet their expectations? I don't think they possibly can, but you know, we've been blown away enough times by the games that they bring out. So hopefully they continue to do so. So yeah, leave your comments based on that.
Yeah, let us know what you think or what you want them to do in Half-Life 3.
Absolutely. Some other things we want to touch on. We've got our new guys that have joined us, haven't we?
Yep.
We've got some new writers.
Yes.
So who have we got? Who are the new guys? So we've got 3 new writers. Bill, Jake and Emily be working on for our YouTube and the main website, and you'll get to meet those guys in the future. The next episode of Talk Time will actually be a Q&A session where we won't be doing a specific topic that we pick. It will be an assortment of questions that we'll answer from you guys. You can throw as many questions as you like, and we'll try and answer as many of them as possible in the episode. We'll just go through them, we'll give you our thoughts as part of a discussion and see where we go with them. So you can submit those questions in the comments, right, Nick? Is that how we're doing it?
Yeah. Just post them in the comments on either ValveTime or on the YouTube video, and then basically we'll kind of just like cherry pick a few that we like and kind of surprise you, the 3 people with them. We might do a few of those as well to kind of try and make it interesting and sort of off script, if that makes sense. Not that this is on script, but you get the point.
This certainly isn't on script. If it was on script, it'd be a lot better.
Yeah.
So that'll be the next time. So that'll probably be in a couple of weeks' time. But yeah, look forward to some of the new stuff we'll be coming out with soon. Valve are back from holiday, so things are going to start picking up, guys. So look forward to it. Maybe that new IP will be announced in a couple of weeks' time. I'm pretty sure there'll be something around the corner, something big. Because something's got to happen. So
something has to. Just has to.
All right, we'll see you next time.
That or we're out of a job.
We'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Right, see you.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.